What happened when UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer confronted Household Cavalry Guard Sergeant William Davies at the tomb of the unknown warrior and ordered, "Arrest this soldier for..." Insubordination wasn't political compliance, it was a moment that would expose the difference between political power and military honor. The Guard's response would spark a constitutional crisis that left Starmer's authority in ruins and the Tomb Guard as a global symbol of duty over politics. Hit subscribe if you believe military honor should never bow to political pressure. The morning light filtered through the stained glass windows of Westminster Abbey, casting reverent shadows across the tomb of the unknown warrior, where Household Cavalry Guard Sergeant William Davies stood in perfect ceremonial formation, his scarlet tunic immaculate, his polished boots reflecting the sacred space where Britain's most honored unknown hero rested. At 28, William embodied the centuries-old tradition of military ceremony that connected modern Britain to the sacrifice of countless heroes whose names had been lost to history but whose service would be remembered through the unwavering dedication of soldiers who understood that some duties transcended politics, public opinion, and even government commands. William's journey to ceremonial guard duty had begun 8 years earlier when he enlisted in the Household Cavalry, straight from school in Yorkshire. Driven not by family military tradition, but by a profound respect for the sacrifice represented by memorials like the tomb of the unknown warrior. 2 deployments to Afghanistan had taught him the difference between serving politicians and serving principles, between following orders and following honor, between protecting government interests and protecting the sacred trust that connected the living with those who had given their lives for something greater than themselves. The tomb of the unknown warrior, where William now stood guard, contained the remains of an unidentified British soldier killed during World War I, chosen to represent the 888th and 246 British and Commonwealth servicemen who died in that conflict and whose bodies were never recovered or identified. For over a century, the tomb had served as a focal point for national remembrance, a place where families could honor loved ones whose final resting places remained unknown, and a symbol of the debt that Britain owed to every generation of military personnel who had served and sacrificed in defense of the nation. William's understanding of ceremonial duty went far deeper than the pageantry and precision that tourists photographed and politicians exploited for media opportunities. Every perfect movement, every flawless uniform detail, every moment of unwavering attention represented a promise kept to the families of the fallen, a guarantee that their heroes would be honored with the same dedication they had shown in life, and a commitment that transcended whatever government happened to be in power at any given moment. Prime Minister Keir Starmer approached Westminster Abbey that morning with the calculated confidence of a politician who had spent his career believing that all institutions, including military traditions, existed primarily to serve political objectives and enhance governmental authority. At 61, Starmer had built his political reputation on challenging established institutions, questioning traditional hierarchies, and demonstrating that modern, progressive government could reshape even the most ancient British customs to serve contemporary political narratives. Starmer's visit to the tomb of the unknown warrior wasn't motivated by genuine respect for military sacrifice or understanding of ceremonial tradition, but by a carefully orchestrated media opportunity designed to demonstrate his government's authority over all aspects of British society, including military ceremonies that he viewed as outdated displays of nationalism that needed to be reformed to reflect modern progressive values and political priorities. The Prime Minister's political advisors had identified military ceremonial duties as symbols of archaic hierarchy that prevented Britain from embracing the kind of egalitarian society that Starmer's government promised to create. In their view, traditions like tomb guard duty represented exactly the kind of unquestioned authority and inherited privilege that progressive politics needed to challenge, reform, or eliminate in order to create a more equitable and politically responsive society. What Starmer and his political team didn't understand, what their focus on opinion polls and media coverage had never taught them, was that they were about to confront something that existed entirely outside the realm of political calculation and governmental control. William Davies wasn't just a soldier following orders, or a government employee serving political masters. He was a guardian of something sacred, a keeper of promises made to the dead, and a representative of military honor that predated any political party and would outlast any government. The confrontation that would define both men's legacies began when Starmer's security detail arrived at Westminster Abbey with demands that the ceremonial guard be temporarily relocated to accommodate a political photo opportunity that would show the Prime Minister connecting with Britain's military heritage, while simultaneously demonstrating his government's authority over traditional institutions that had previously operated independent of direct political control. William's response to these political demands would reveal the fundamental difference between serving temporary political authority and serving eternal principles, between following government orders and following military honor, between protecting politicians and protecting the sacred trust that connected Britain's living with Britain's honored dead. Starmer's arrival at Westminster Abbey was orchestrated with the precision of a political campaign event rather than the reverence appropriate for approaching Britain's most sacred military memorial. His entourage included media advisors, photographers and security personnel who treated the sacred space like a political venue rather than a tomb, where an unknown hero rested and where families came to honor loved ones whose remains had never been found or identified. The Prime Minister approached William with the expectation of automatic compliance that had marked his interactions with other government institutions during his tenure. In Starmer's political worldview, military personnel were government employees who followed governmental directives. Ceremonial duties were public services that served political objectives, and traditional institutions existed primarily to enhance the authority and legitimacy of whatever political party happened to control the government at any given time. Sergeant Davies, Starmer said, his voice carrying the authoritative tone he used when addressing civil servants and government employees. I need you to step aside from your position so that we can conduct an important government ceremony that will demonstrate this administration's commitment to honoring Britain's military heritage while modernizing our approach to national remembrance. William's response was the measured professionalism that had been drilled into him through years of ceremonial training and reinforced by genuine understanding of what his duty represented to military families and the British people. Sir, with respect, I am currently performing ceremonial guard duty at the tomb of the unknown warrior. This duty cannot be interrupted for political events or media opportunities. The Prime Minister's reaction revealed the depth of his misunderstanding about the relationship between political authority and military honor. In his experience, government officials who refused political directives faced disciplinary action. Civil servants who challenged governmental authority were removed from their positions, and institutional traditions that conflicted with political objectives were reformed or eliminated to serve contemporary governmental needs. Sergeant, you seem to misunderstand your role in this government, Starmer continued, his voice hardening with the kind of political intimidation he had used successfully against other institutional officials who had initially resisted his administration's reforms. You are a government employee, paid by taxpayers, serving under the authority of Her Majesty's government. When the Prime Minister gives you a directive, your job is to comply, not to lecture me about ceremonial procedures. But William's understanding of military duty, ceremonial responsibility, and the sacred trust he represented extended far beyond the political calculations and governmental hierarchies that defined Starmer's worldview. His oath of service hadn't been to temporary political authority or changing governmental priorities, but to the crown, to military honor, and to the eternal principles that connected Britain's living with Britain's honored dead. Sir, William replied, his voice maintaining the respectful tone required when addressing civilian authority, while also carrying the unmistakable firmness of someone who understood that some principles transcended political pressure. My duty is to maintain guard at this tomb regardless of political events or governmental requirements. The unknown warrior deserves continuous honor, and that honor cannot be interrupted for political convenience. The confrontation escalated when Starmer realized that his political authority was being challenged by a military tradition that operated independent of governmental control, that his commands were being questioned by someone whose loyalty extended beyond political parties and electoral cycles, and that his carefully orchestrated media opportunity was being disrupted by a soldier who refused to treat sacred duty as subordinate to political objectives. Members of the household cavalry who were present during the confrontation watched with growing concern as they witnessed their prime minister attempting to force a ceremonial guard to abandon his sacred post for a political photo opportunity. These soldiers understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented in British constitutional history: a direct confrontation between political authority and military honor, between governmental power and ceremonial tradition, between temporary political interests and eternal military principles. The military personnel present faced an impossible situation that their training and tradition had never prepared them for. Their oath of service included loyalty to civilian authority and respect for governmental command, but it also included dedication to military honor, ceremonial tradition, and the sacred trust that connected them to every generation of British military personnel who had served and sacrificed in defense of principles that transcended any individual government or political party. As the confrontation intensified, other visitors to Westminster Abbey began to notice the unusual tension surrounding the tomb of the unknown warrior, where a prime minister was attempting to force a ceremonial guard to abandon his post, and a soldier was quietly but firmly refusing to comply with political demands that violated the sacred nature of his duty. The moment that would define Keir Starmer's political legacy and transform Sergeant William Davies into a global symbol of military honor came when the Prime Minister, frustrated by his inability to force compliance through political intimidation, made a decision that would trigger a constitutional crisis unprecedented in modern British history. "If you refuse to follow the lawful orders of your government," Starmer declared, his voice rising with the kind of political anger that had previously cowed institutional officials into submission, "then you are guilty of insubordination and dereliction of duty. I am ordering your immediate arrest for refusing to obey the directives of Her Majesty's government." The words hung in the sacred air of Westminster Abbey like a desecration of everything the space represented. Starmer had just ordered the arrest of a soldier for maintaining ceremonial guard duty at Britain's most sacred military memorial, for refusing to abandon his post for a political photo opportunity, and for choosing military honor over political convenience. William's response was everything that distinguished military honor from political expediency: ceremonial duty from governmental service, and eternal principles from temporary authority. He remained at perfect attention, his bearing unchanged, his dedication to the unknown warrior unwavering despite being threatened with arrest by his own Prime Minister for performing the sacred duty he had sworn to maintain. "Sir," William said, his voice carrying the quiet strength that had sustained British military personnel through centuries of service and sacrifice, "I will remain at my post as long as I am physically able to do so. The unknown warrior deserves continuous honor, and I will not abandon that honor for political objectives." The other military personnel present found themselves witnessing a moment that would be studied in constitutional law classes and military academies for generations to come. Their Prime Minister had ordered the arrest of a ceremonial guard for refusing to abandon his sacred post, creating a direct confrontation between political authority and military tradition that had no precedent in British constitutional history. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, the senior military officer present, faced an impossible decision that would define his own legacy and potentially determine the future relationship between Britain's military and political institutions. Could he follow a political order to arrest a soldier for maintaining ceremonial duty? Did civilian authority extend to forcing military personnel to abandon sacred responsibilities for political convenience? Where was the constitutional line between governmental power and military honor? "Prime Minister," Lieutenant Colonel Morrison said, his voice carrying the diplomatic skill that senior military officers developed through years of navigating the complex relationship between military service and political authority, "I respectfully submit that Sergeant Davies is performing his lawfully assigned ceremonial duty. Arresting a soldier for maintaining guard at the tomb of the unknown warrior would create significant constitutional and public relations challenges for your government." But Starmer's political calculation had moved beyond constitutional considerations or public opinion concerns. In his view, this confrontation had become a test of governmental authority over military institutions, a demonstration of political power over traditional hierarchies, and a precedent that would determine whether his administration could reshape British institutions to serve contemporary political objectives. The Prime Minister's security detail found themselves in an unprecedented situation that their training had never anticipated. They had been ordered to arrest a British soldier who was performing ceremonial guard duty at Westminster Abbey, creating a constitutional crisis that could define the future relationship between civilian and military authority in Britain. International media outlets that had initially come to cover a routine political event suddenly found themselves documenting a constitutional confrontation that raised fundamental questions about the relationship between political power and military honor, between governmental authority and ceremonial tradition, and between temporary political interests and eternal military principles. The confrontation attracted the attention of military families throughout Britain who understood that this wasn't just about one soldier or one ceremony, but about whether political authority could force military personnel to abandon sacred duties for political convenience, whether governmental power extended to controlling every aspect of military tradition, and whether the honored dead would continue to receive the respect they deserved regardless of political pressures. Veterans organizations, constitutional scholars, and military historians began weighing in on a confrontation that had implications far beyond the immediate political dispute between a prime minister and a ceremonial guard. This was about the fundamental principles that governed British society, the relationship between temporary political authority and eternal military honor, and whether sacred duties could be subordinated to political objectives. As the standoff continued, with William maintaining his perfect ceremonial bearing despite the threat of arrest and Starmer insisting on his governmental authority to control military ceremonies, it became clear that this moment would either establish political dominance over military tradition or demonstrate that some principles transcended even prime ministerial authority. What happened over the following hours transformed a local confrontation between political authority and military honor into a global demonstration of how attempts to exploit military tradition for political gain could catastrophically backfire when they encountered genuine military dedication and international scrutiny. Within minutes of international media reporting, Starmer's order to arrest a ceremonial guard for maintaining his post at the tomb of the unknown warrior, social media exploded with support for Sergeant Davies and condemnation of the Prime Minister's unprecedented attack on British military tradition. The hashtag #ToStandWithTheGuard began trending worldwide, as millions of people expressed outrage at a politician who would order the arrest of a soldier for honoring the dead. Military veterans from around the world shared stories of their own ceremonial duties and sacred responsibilities, explaining to global audiences why William's refusal to abandon his post represented everything honorable about military service and why Starmer's demand violated fundamental principles of respect for military sacrifice and ceremonial tradition. The international response revealed the depth of global respect for military honor and ceremonial duty that Starmer's political calculations had completely failed to anticipate. Leaders from allied nations expressed private concerns about a British Prime Minister who would create constitutional crises over military ceremonies, while military organizations worldwide declared their support for a soldier who had chosen sacred duty over political convenience. British public's reaction was even more devastating to Starmer's political authority than the international condemnation. Opinion polls showed overwhelming support for Sergeant Davies and unprecedented disapproval of the Prime Minister's handling of the situation, with military families, veterans organizations, and ordinary citizens expressing disgust at a politician who would threaten to arrest a soldier for honoring the unknown warrior. Constitutional scholars pointed out that Starmer's order represented a dangerous precedent that could undermine the independence of military institutions from direct political control, while legal experts questioned whether the Prime Minister had the authority to order arrests for soldiers performing their lawfully assigned ceremonial duties. The political damage to Starmer's government was immediate and catastrophic. Cabinet members began privately expressing concerns about a Prime Minister whose judgment led him to create constitutional crises over military ceremonies, while backbench MPs faced constituent anger about their leader's attack on a beloved military tradition. William Davies, meanwhile, continued his ceremonial duty with the same perfect bearing he had maintained throughout the confrontation, proving that genuine military honor was unshakable regardless of political pressure, media attention, or threats from the highest levels of government. His dedication to the unknown warrior became a symbol of everything that distinguished military service from political careers, sacred duty from governmental employment, and eternal principles from temporary authority. The attempt to arrest William was quietly abandoned as Starmer's political advisers realized that the optics of police officers arresting a ceremonial guard at Westminster Abbey would create images that would destroy the government's political credibility permanently. Instead, they began a desperate attempt at damage control that involved claiming the confrontation had been misunderstood and that the Prime Minister had always respected military tradition. But the political damage was irreversible. Starmer's authority had been publicly challenged by a military tradition that commanded more respect from the British people than their elected government, and his response had revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of the relationship between political power and military honor that destroyed his credibility as a leader. Military recruitment, which had been struggling under Starmer's government, suddenly saw an increase as young people inspired by William's example sought to serve something greater than political expediency. The household cavalry received thousands of letters of support from around the world, thanking them for maintaining military honor in the face of political pressure. The long-term consequences extended far beyond Starmer's political career. The confrontation established that British military tradition possessed an independence and moral authority that transcended political control, that ceremonial duties represented sacred trusts that couldn't be subordinated to governmental convenience, and that the British people would support military honor over political authority when forced to choose between them. William Davies received recognition from military organizations worldwide for his principled stand, but for him, the recognition was less important than the knowledge that he had preserved the honor of the unknown warrior and demonstrated that some duties were more sacred than political commands, some traditions more important than governmental objectives, and some principles worth defending regardless of personal consequences. The Tomb Guard rotation continued with its centuries-old precision, proving that political storms might rage around military traditions, but the sacred duty of honoring Britain's fallen heroes would continue regardless of whoever temporarily occupied political office or whatever agenda they might pursue at the expense of military honor. So what do you think? Tell us in the comments and press the subscribe button for more stories like this.